bitter criticism. Um, Bitter criticism. Reading. I don't remember. Let's read. Forbidden news for the free world.
Santa María, 17 años. San Felipe, 33 grados.
And says Russia Today, yeah, forbidden news for the free world. February 7. U.S. wants Ukraine conflict to end by summer. Zelensky. Washington is pushing to resolve the hostilities before focusing on domestic issues, the Ukrainian leader has said.
30 grados.
I have a Volodymyr Zelensky picture. The US wants the Russia-Ukraine conflict to be resolved by summer before focusing on domestic issues, Ukrainian leader Vladimir Zelensky has said. Maybe he's going to abide from the office. It's time, you know. The period has come to an end. The period in the office. There's another word for period. Anyway, the remarks come after the second round of trilateral talks between Russia, Ukraine, and the US in Abu Dhabi earlier this week. Like the first round in January, the negotiations were held behind closed doors, with no details shared by either side, other than Russia and the US calling the talks quote-unquote productive and quote-unquote constructive. The latest negotiations have yielded an exchange of 314 prisoners of war between Russia and Ukraine, which is nothing. Speaking to reporters on Saturday, Zelensky said Washington is ready to push both sides to speed up the settlement process. Quote, the Americans are proposing that the parties end the war by the beginning of this summer and will likely pressure them to adhere to this timetable, end quote, he claimed. I cannot remember. The name is not period, it's like, I don't remember. The Ukrainian leader suggests that Washington's desire to speed up the settlement process stems from quote-unquote domestic issues that are becoming quote-unquote more pressing for it, end quote, apparently referring to the upcoming US midterm election. The American side has offered to host a meeting between the Russian and Ukrainian sides in Miami, he said, adding that it could occur within a week. Why not? American Virgin Islands. And Zelensky also reiterated his refusal to withdraw Ukrainian forces from the parts of Donbass it still controls, confirming that Kiev's stance on territorial concessions remains unchanged. Both Russia and the US have said that territorial issues remain the main sticking point in the peace process. Russia has insisted that the settlement must include Ukrainians' withdrawal from the areas within the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics that are still under its control. The republics, which broke away from Kiev in the aftermath of the 2014 Maidan coup, overwhelmingly voted to join Russia in late 2022. Russia Today said, and I believe it, that's why I'm reading. I mean, I support Russia. Kiev has refused to recognize the referendums and rule out any territorial concession. Yeah, it's tricky. It's hard. I can't remember the name for Zelensky period. I mean, this anyway, period in office. And there's another. I mean, I'm going to read. Let's read a couple of more news from Russia today. This is more interesting than Russian. Well, I just read Russian news. I'm going to read the Iranian news. February 7, Iran warns it will strike US bases if attacked. There is deep quote-unquote mistrust in relations between Washington and Tehran following last year's strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, Abbas Araghchi has said. And there's a photograph. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. Iran will strike American bases in the Middle East if the US attacks the country. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has warned. The US and Iran held indirect talks in Oman on Friday amid heightened tensions following strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities last year, which were justified as preventing Tehran from acquiring nuclear weapons, an ambition it denies. Well, I want to say I'm going to read Iran next time because Iran is suffering. Iran is the victim. US President Donald Trump has since warned of further attacks unless Iran resumes negotiations and sent an quote-unquote armada to the Middle East last month, demanding limits on uranium enrichment and Iran's missile program. Friday's meeting marked the first attempt to bridge the standoff. No breakthrough was announced, though both sides agreed to continue talks. Speaking on Al Jazeera on Saturday, Araghchi welcomed the resumption of talks as quote-unquote a good starting point, but noted that a climate of quote-unquote mistrust exists after last year's strikes. He warned that Tehran will respond in kind to any future US attack. Quote, if Washington attacks us, there is no possibility of attacking US soil, but we will strike their bases in the region, end quote, he said. Araghchi reiterated that Iran is prepared for the possibility of war with the US, but said the nuclear issue can only be resolved through dialogue, which should be free of threats or pressure. He insisted that enrichment is Iran's right and must continue, adding that Iran will keep enriched uranium at home and set levels based on the nation's needs. He also ruled out negotiations over Iran's missile program, calling it a quote-unquote purely defensive matter. Trump hailed the Oman talks as quote-unquote very good, but continued his threats, warning on Friday that failure to reach a deal will bring quote-unquote very steep consequences for Iran. Moments after the talks ended, the US State Department announced new sanctions on the country targeting over 30 entities, individuals, and vessels over its alleged illicit petroleum and petrochemical trade. Further meetings between the US and Iran are expected next week. The US maintains major military facilities in Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and the UAE. white, I guess. With deployments in Iraq and Syria and access in Jordan and Djibouti, Tehran has long argued that the network of US bases near its borders constitutes a direct security threat. And well, that's it by now. I'm going to read just one more. There's a news about Turkey. This is terrible because watching the social media about Epstein files, social media says Turkey sold thousands of babies to Epstein. Anyway, Turkey must not trust Turkey. February 7. EU to seek closer ties with Turkey after Ukraine conflict. Commissioner. Lasting stability in Europe will depend on a quote-unquote strong partnership between Brussels and Ankara. Marta Koz has said. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan on the right meets with EU Enlargement Commissioner Marta Koz, Ankara. The EU is looking to rekindle its contentious relationship with Turkey, Politico reported on Friday, citing EU Enlargement Commissioner Marta Koz. Koz said Brussels will need a strong partnership with Ankara once the Ukraine conflict is settled. Relations between Ankara and Brussels have worsened in recent years amid stalled EU accession talks, disputes over the customs union, migration tensions, and Turkey's foreign policy. The EU also accused Turkey of democratic backsliding over what it calls repression of opposition to President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, a label Ankara rejects as politically motivated, accusing Brussels of double standards. However, according to Koz, Turkey's potential role in a post-conflict order, including as a peacekeeper and regional power broker in the Black Sea, could make it a critical partner. Quote, peace in Ukraine will change the realities in Europe, especially in the Black Sea region. Turkey will be a very important partner for us, end quote. Koz told the outlet in a written statement ahead of her two-day visit to Ankara. Quote unquote, preparing for peace and stability in Europe implies preparing a strong partnership with Turkey. During her visit, Koz met with Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan. Both sides reaffirmed Turkey's EU candidate status and highlighted cooperation on security, connectivity, and economic integration. Fidan, however, stressed the urgent need to modernize the 30-year-old customs union, with Ankara says disadvantages the country, particularly the trade and market access. Amendments are contingent on Cyprus lifting its veto on Turkish participation, tied to Ankara's refusal to allow Cyprus-fledged vessels in its ports. Ahead of the trip, Koz also announced that the European Investment Bank will return to Turkey with 200 million euros in renewable energy loans after suspending new lending in 2019 over Cyprus disputes. While NATO members, Turkey has refused to join Western sanctions on Russia. I'm going to leave now.